Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Welcome, Coach Taf. How are you today?
Wassalamu warahmatullah. Alhamdulillah, I'm very good. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you so much. Please share with us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Okay, so long story short, in fact, at the moment I have a really amazing role. I work with my wife at the moment as a relationship coach, mashallah. We've both been doing it for a few years now. I've achieved an award for my coaching, relationship coach in particular. Victoria is certified with the Gottman Institute as well. We put a lot of effort into the work that we do. So between us both, we coach couples as a couple, to help them with their marriages, their relationship. And I also work with Muslim men, and I hope that we can speak a little bit more about the work that I do with Muslim men in particular. So yeah, absolutely. I'm a coach, and I specifically focusing on relationships.
Right, and this is exactly why I have you here today, is because I specifically have been seeking somebody who can share the experience of divorce through a male lens, and also because your work is solely focused, dominantly focused on men. So you have
Yes.
probably have a wealth of experience there. So you yourself have been through quite a journey, a personal journey, a tumultuous journey. And if you would be willing to share your own divorce experience and how did that affect you on all levels, really? So whether it was emotional, physical, spiritually, on all of those fronts.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you have any questions as a follow-up, please do ask those. I always say that no one gets married to get divorced. And that's always the case. We get married to have a life with someone forever, I suppose. And then something happens along the way, unexpected most of the time, or it takes some time to a couple to really come to a point where they make the decision that we can no longer be together. But in all cases, a breakup, of a relationship is a severance, it's a loss, and with it's attached a type of trauma. So with that in mind, this was my second divorce. So it wasn't my first divorce. So my first marriage was for 16 years. So I'm a very, as they say, he's a keeper. So I was with my first wife for 16 years. Something happened there. And then I got married again, and I was, with her for 12 years, my ex. So, 28 years of being married, and it left me very distraught, to say the least. The whole severance twice, the breakup, and I'll go into some of the reasons behind me feeling such a traumatic severance. But in answer to your question, I always talk about four areas, four dimensions within oneself, and to be cognizant of those. So it left me with a sense of loss, but also a sense of huge guilt that I had failed. So for me, it was that I can't do this thing, marriage. It doesn't work for me. I'd spent 28 years with two different people. It's not me. And fortunately for me, I had a really great brother who stopped me one day and said, actually, you didn't fail, but the marriage failed. The relationship failed. And it was probably the first time I felt this sense of comfort in that I wasn't solely responsible for this breakup. There's something between, those us two, people, something didn't work out. And it was that those nuances and those dynamics that, over time, made the relationship draw us apart, and finally there was this breakup. So absolutely, it was a very difficult time for me, especially as a Muslim man. I think it's difficult for anyone to have a breakup, especially if they're committed. But as a Muslim man with a stigma around, being divorced, being a single dad at the time as well, this guy can't get it right. He's not able to hold himself together. Why does he keep on making mistakes? And most of these things were going on in my head, by the way. So these are things that are going in my head in terms of those negative self-talk, But also at the same time, it's this very emotionally, deeply emotional response I had on a very deep level. And I'll go into the origins of those emotional feelings I had. But in essence, I felt a sense of failure. I literally was sleeping on my son's living room sofa for 4 months. So I was without a home. I had to leave the family home, living out of a very small sports bag with a few clothes in there. I would put on a very brave face at work, front a mask, and come home and really curl up and just go to sleep sometimes. Sometimes just I was very antisocial. So I disconnected from people, disconnected from my family, friends. I was living with my son and I wasn't really conversant too much with him as well. I mean, how could I explain what had happened to him? And so on and so forth. So I went inward, quite inward. And it had a very huge impact on me on a very psychological level, but also spiritually. Sometimes people don't feel that, a breakup will affect someone spiritually, but it did me on a very, deep level. So I had these questions as to, I've done everything that I could have done as a believing man, and why would this fail? Why did I get to this point where this thing failed, where I gave it every single thing? And on top of that, it was a case that psychologically, psychologically I'm affected, spiritually I'm affected, and it was the emotional, I'd say, flooding that really got to me because I didn't really understand it until the second divorce. I didn't really feel its weight until the second time it happened. And there were so many mixed feelings I had, and the emotional flooding was so severe that I'd sometimes uncontrollably cry and not understand why I was crying, what was happening to me, why it was happening, and not being able to be the person I always thought I was. And that was, I'd say, probably the most revealing moment for me, that there was a mask that I had for many years, which was all of a sudden taken off.
Would you say that your emotional, psychological response to your second divorce was the same as the first?
I think the first, to be honest with you, I think the first one I gave myself a good enough reason because of the circumstances, which I can't go too much into. They were private. The first one, I was able to reconcile what happened and reason with it and say, okay, I know why it happened. And, people do get divorced. Even the companions got divorced. So I'd say those things, right, to make myself feel a bit better. But it was difficult. Nevertheless, it was difficult. I became the sole carer for my children as well, in the first time round as well. And so I adjusted my own lifestyle, what I was doing work-wise, etc. So it's completely different. The second time was, you have to take notice now. This isn't working. It hasn't worked. And you thought you knew it all, but it hasn't worked.
So then what kind of shift happened that led to a tipping point?
You mean to change to the positive? Right, okay.
Because now you've just mentioned when you were sleeping on your son's couch and things just seem to be quite dismal all around.
Mhm. It's really funny because subhanAllah, when you teach your children something, and my experience was that I taught them the best I knew. And it was my second eldest who actually said something to me one day that completely shifted the way I thought about things. And he quotes Les Brown. And Les Brown said there's an African proverb that says, if you defeat the enemy within, the enemy outside can do you no harm. And it was he said it in a way which was so profound. And he said it to me very directly, in that he understood that my defeatism was within me, not because of anyone else or circumstances. And so he introduced me to Les Brown and a few statements, and I thought, what am I doing? What is this thing that I've actually been overcome by?
And then what happened? How did you pull yourself together?
Okay, so what happened then was I realized that actually I needed to take control of my life as opposed to my circumstances being in control of me. So the first thing I did was, and I actually take many men through this process, and it's applicable to all walks of life, to men and women, is that, you know, when oftentimes when we commit ourselves to someone, we sometimes compromise or give up something that we love. And if we're not careful, we can spend months and years not doing that very thing that gives us life or, you know, creates that spark inside of us. So for me, it was always the gym. So the one thing I realized actually what I was missing, I had been missing for many years, was the gym. So I purchased a gym membership. And the first time I'd realized something was really wrong was this gym membership was around £10, I think probably $20 or so, $15. And I questioned myself whether I could afford it or not. And the realization was that I had literally forgone any self-care and was doing everything and anything for everyone else around me. And for myself, I just literally just not even bother. So that was the first awakening that self-care was a neglected area of my life. And therefore, any return to some normality for all of us is to go back to caring for ourselves again and not feel actually guilty about that. And I always make this distinction because many people feel that self-care is selfish or self-centered. And I say, as a Muslim, it's not self-centered, but soul-centered. If you anchor it, you know, in the context or frame it within faith, it's soul-centered. You know, as Allah says in the Quran that, you know, Ku anfusakum ahlikum nara, yeah? Save yourself and your family from the fire. So he tells us to save ourselves first. You know, our bodies have a right over us. We will be questioned about five, you know, so it's always going back to us. I will be personally responsible for answering those very important questions. So it has to be a very soul-centered approach. So I went back to something I loved. So I went back to the gym, and then I began to do some retail therapy. So just going out and buying some clothes for myself. So I bought a brand new wardrobe and got the things I needed to get, you know, to make me feel better. And so there was a period where I felt this push and pull that, am I allowed to do this? Should I do this? Yes, I want to do this. And that push and pull actually took me through this journey and a realization that we all need to get to a point where the clarity in our minds is such that when we look after ourselves, we are able to show up better for the people that we love. And you know, oftentimes what happens is we think the reverse, that if I sacrifice myself, right, I can do the things that I want to do for the people I love. But actually what happens is we turn up, you know, and show up for them 25% or 50% or whatever. So self-care and being soul-centered actually is hugely beneficial for everyone. It's a win-win.
And so you started to go to the gym, updated your wardrobe. Then did you see like a ripple effect with your relationships, your social relationships, your family relationships?
I did actually. And one of the things that happened to me, well, I visited my nephew in London in the first 4 months, you know, when I had this depressive state, when I was quite low. And he said something amazing. And he said, Uncle, he said, don't actually go looking for anyone. He said, do the things that you love doing and she will come to you.
Very insightful for a young
Very,
person.
very insightful. And he said it in such a way, I kind of looked at him, I thought he was being rude at first. He goes, don't go looking for anyone. And I interpret that as you can't get it right anyway. Right? But it wasn't that. It was being really sincere, saying, don't go looking for anyone, just do what you love doing. And so what happened was I went through this journey of, like I said, the gym, the clothes. I ended up going to Africa, doing some charity work. I was posting, you know, my gym selfies and inspirational quotes. So I had this metamorphosis where I just began to see the positive side of life, but not for the sake of someone else, like marrying someone. It was for me. So I internalized everything for me. I began to do things for me. I began to live a life for me at last, and everything else fell into place. And it's amazing. Sometimes we have this fear that, if I begin to do those things, somehow I will lose out on something else, right? But here it is. The real, I'd say, magic is, in some ways, is that when you begin to, peel off the layers within of these falsities, we pretend to be someone, or we're trying to put on a brave face for other people, or try to fit in. What happens is we have a mask, and it's not really who we are. But when you are who you are, and you show the world who you are, then you attract who you deserve.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So what I really appreciate about your story is just it's so honest, and it's so I find that it's very seldom where I am able to meet a man who's willing to share his story, because they might feel that it's kind of unmanly to do so. Or they'll say, what's the point? I moved on from there, or they feel too vulnerable. Why do you think that it's important for men to share their stories?
From a personal level, there's this cliche, your pain can become your purpose, right? But I do literally believe that. And I think one of the reasons for me embarking upon the work that I do actually was a point where I describe it in an article that I wrote, that, I was on the sofa and these sun rays came through the curtains, and there's this realization that no man should ever experience what I'm experiencing. And it's almost like this catalyst that charged me to work and help men to not fall into that, depressive state, or be in such a way feeling that I have all these emotions, and where are these emotions coming from? I'm doing all this work, but my mind is telling me something else. I want to express myself, but I can't express myself. So I didn't want that to happen to other men, to experience what I was experiencing. And I know they do. I know many Muslim men do. I know many, in fact, I live in Leeds in the UK, and we have the highest rate of suicide for men in the whole country. And many of the reasons are cited because of the inability of men to be able to share their thoughts and feelings. It's very real, it's very raw. And I didn't want any man actually to feel that he doesn't have a space. So what I do is I create a safe space for men to be vulnerable, to actually be able to say what they feel like saying without feeling there's going to be some blame placed upon them.
So it's healing and cathartic, just to be able to get it out there, to just remove the mask, even if it's
Absolutely. And we were never, personally speaking, we were never modeled how to be emotionally available to others. My father didn't he didn't show me hardly any emotion. I've spoken to many men, same experience. So when it comes to relationships, it's not a surprise that men they're not able to show up emotionally as much as they should do. And many of the problems for men and relationships stem from that inability to be able to be emotional, sadly.
Right. I'm going to transition to, and feel free to speak from your own experience. This comes up where a person, after their divorce, might take ownership for their part that they had to play in the dissolution of the marriage. And then when they are considering remarrying, this fear that arises because they might be fearful that, oh my goodness, what if I continue and carry those deeply entrenched subconscious behaviors that I might have had in my previous marriage, whether oh, I was a very controlling husband, or I was hypercritical.
Mhm.
What if that ends up arising again, and I'm back to square one in a terrible situation?
Mhm.
No. Yeah.
So the question is that what if somebody's thinking that those things are going to happen again? And so what's the point of bothering in moving forward?
I guess the question is that when a person looks at, for example, updating his wardrobe or going back to the gym, those are very doable things.
Yes, yes.
Or improving your social circle, because your friends don't live with you.
No.
When the person realizes, because like the marriage home, it's so personal and so intimate and so unique.
Mhm.
There are all these other dynamics that are arising all the time, and there's they're like sub dynamics, and there's just where they could be passive aggression, or there could be
Yes.
gaslighting, or and then the person realizes, oh my gosh, like I did A, B, and C, and I only see it now. And
Mhm.
so those are things that are not so easy to change, because they
No.
might arise from, for example, the way that one was raised, and so there's just so automatic, like it almost feels like it's part of the DNA, and it's the worry and fear of jeopardizing
Yes,
a
yes.
possible beautiful relationship. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I have a model which I take men through who particularly been through a breakup or divorce, and it's ARC. So A stands for acceptance of your role in the breakup, because everyone's culpable. Even remaining silent in the face of a problem is culpability, right? So acceptance of what was my role in the breakup of this marriage. R is to repair all of those things that you have, mentioned, like, maybe childhood trauma, maybe it's attachment style, maybe it's the way that, I've been brought up by, my parents or carers, maybe have anger issues. Just repair those things. And C is to create an identity and a life moving forward based on your core values and beliefs. And that process itself, the first is the most difficult, acceptance. Because who wants to accept they were wrong? Who wants to put their hand up and say, actually, I was culpable, and these were the reasons why it happened. These are my contributions. And it's not until we get to that point where we're able to hold our hands up and say, guilty as charged, I don't think we can move on. So it's a very introspective process. It's a very deeply, like you say, cathartic process whereby you are not only discovering, what caused this breakup, but you're also discovering the parts of you, the shadows, the parts of you that really need that intensive work. Because if you want to heal, if you really want to heal, not even for the next relationship, just for yourself. If you want to heal from this feeling, you need to do the work. You need to do the work. So to give you an idea of what I went through, and then that became the tool for me to use with others, is that I went through 8 months of shadow work, inner child work with someone. And that process was so amazing that I didn't realize I had some trauma from my childhood that actually played into both of my marriages, literally. So the discovery that my trauma of neglect as an 8-year-old and abandonment as a 14-year-old played as two characters showing up in my marriages. So whenever there was a tension, I'd either feel that I was being abandoned or neglected. So this small child comes out and starts to play and starts to cry and starts to, yell and stuff. But it's not me. It's this unhealed child who's just saying all these different things and wanting attention and validation and acknowledgement and recognition. So my own personal journey in understanding where it came from was a first step. And then the journaling, the work, being honest with myself, really honest with myself, I literally had an amazing public profile. And the first time I remember speaking to my coach and owning up to something was very difficult because I couldn't be that person. So I'm looking at myself from the outside and saying, how can this be me? But it was me. And I think that's the most important thing, is that when you're able to get to a point where you can detach how you feel about yourself from a status point of view to really connect with yourself from a healing point of view, you begin to understand what needs to be healed and how you can move on.
That's really incredible that it only took you 8 months to change something that was so entrenched from childhood. That's really amazing, mashallah.
You
So,
know, Hamza, I think it probably was work in progress, but those 8 months were intense, very intense. I'm still healing. So, my wife and I, Victoria and I, we speak about this, and so she kind of supports me when my 8-year-old boy comes up.
Tafazal, I was just going to say that is that because these are things that are from the way that we were raised and embedded in the subconscious, there aren't quick changes to these things. So it's so important having a spouse with
Yes.
whom you can be vulnerable and say, look, like these are my wounds. I'm showing them to you. Can you be
Yes.
sensitive with them? Or when this happens, can you just kind of call me out in a gentle way?
Yeah, Sister Smile, that was difficult at first. Again, being a man, being a Muslim man who is men are meant to be macho, stand up to everything, be the alpha, not show any, weakness. It was very difficult the first time I was being vulnerable with Victoria. But I'd say she nurtured me in that process. She was able to hold my hand and say, it's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable, and I will not use this against you, because that's what I was used to. Is when I was being myself as a child, it would be used against me. It was weaponized. So when she said, actually, I won't use it against you, it was still, do I do this? And it's like you have that moment because you have this deeply entrenched subconscious belief that it happens and it's going to happen again. But breaking through that barrier is actually where you receive this freedom. It's the most difficult juncture, where all you've been used to is this, kickback. Again, no validation, no recognition. You're pushed to the back of the queue, as it were, and then you're facing this possibility that someone here is able to hear me out the way I want to be heard. And I'd say to every man and every woman is that if you're able to be vulnerable with someone special, with someone, anyone, it's a gift. Because we still, to this day, we still heal each other. She still has feelings of insecurity. I have feelings of neglect. And whenever they show up, we recognize it. But the most important thing to me is that we talk about this. It doesn't come like naturally. We say we're not mind readers. We have to communicate with each other. I'm feeling this, when you said that, it affected me in this way, right? I cried because of this. It wasn't you. It was just, there was a trigger. And the trigger was the way you just turned around, you just the way you turned around, or it's this word that you used, or this thing is reminding me of something else. And it's like it sometimes happens when you least expect it. But being able to share those vulnerabilities is, I'd say, the most important thing for a couple, to be really constantly in tune with each other and make sure those adjustments are continuously made, rather than being, oh, I've achieved this, optimum level of connection with someone, and I don't need to do any more work. No, remain curious. Always remain curious about your spouse, asking questions. John Gottman talks about love maps, continuously keep working on discovering you know, your spouse's likes, dislikes, what they did as a child, as a teenager, movies, whatever it is. Build those maps inside of your head, and your map of them should be the most detailed map more than anyone else. So when it comes to the typical Muslim husband and Muslim wife, are we talking in strange ways now? Right? Are we talking a different language? Because one of the things that I come across so much, Sister Samaya, and really I'm referring here directly to the men, is that men are so disconnected from their families that I don't know what word to use. It's so sad, because the contribution that they make in terms of food, shelter, and clothing seems to be adequate. And that contribution is, I've done my bit, right? But their spouse is looking for connection, right? Now, if you have a disconnect there, one person believes they're doing their best this way, and the other person is saying, actually, no, you're missing the mark completely over here somewhere. There's a huge miscommunication here. And how do we get to a point where a wife can say, actually, I'm not looking for all of this, some of it. I'm looking for more of this from you. And he's saying, I can't because I'm too busy with this.
Or maybe I can't because I don't know how. I don't even know what that means.
Yeah. And some of it is that as well. So yeah, one of the things, in fact, is the lack of relationship literacy, understanding how relationships work.
Mhm. So just on that point, this is the struggle is that I see many women, forgive me, this is generalization, but from my experience, women who get divorced, they're the ones who will read books and listen to podcasts and try to be self-reflective and that type of thing. Whereas generally speaking, the divorced man might not go travel that path as well. So then moving forward and finding a spouse can become challenging because you need to also be with somebody who can match you in terms
Yes.
of their interest of self-development, and also, as you're saying, establishing literacy in relationships, correct?
Yes, yes, yes. And it's true. So the statistics on divorce, it's women that mostly initiate divorce because men are comfortable. Men are comfortable with where they are. So again, the role of being a provider, food, shelter, and clothing, mostly. And if everything is working according to their understanding, you know, why fix something that isn't broken? Whereas women saying, actually, it's not working. I've been after you for months and years to connect with me, to be more intimate, to show me affection, to make me feel special, make me feel like I'm someone special, as opposed to just being your cook and your cleaner or whatever, you know? So it's really important to understand that, you know, women are looking for one thing, and not only one thing, but one thing which is missing. She's missing in men mostly, is that their understanding of what really drives a woman, okay, is where you need to focus your attention. That literacy. How do I actually communicate? How do I have a conversation where it's a two-way conversation? How do we speak about something without getting into a conflict which is perpetual? You know, how do we discuss very important issues around raising our children, finances, shopping even, where we're going to go on holiday, etc., etc., etc. You know, where is that parity in terms of understanding, you know, and that feeling of thereby of connection?
So adding to that, you are a man coach. What
Yes.
things have you seen in terms of men undergoing their struggles and then the progress that they make?
So what the main struggle that Muslim men have, without exception, is around their mental health. Yes. And it's peculiar because you wouldn't think that. Because
I wouldn't think that, because you
no,
think that because many men, for example, seem quite stoic, and it's the women who would admit that they are prone to anxiety or.
yeah, men talk less, and because they talk less, they don't reveal much. So what I've seen is I had a challenge, 7-day challenge with Muslim men in there, and the top thing that came out again was mental health. Second is emotional health, and they're very close, by the way. And the one thing that's missing is that they don't know, number one, how to process their thoughts and their emotions. So they're feeling it, but they don't know how to process them. So what happens is they shun or put aside all those thoughts and focus on the next best thing. So typically what men will do is they're not too focused about their thoughts. So if their thoughts come up that are negative, they'll just push them away. But thoughts pushed away are suppressed thoughts. They don't go away, they're still there. And nothing's ever suppressed but expressed in different ways. So what will happen is there will be some emotional ramifications of that. And if they're not aware of their emotional state, it'll come out in anger, in addiction, in just not really engaging with anyone, being distant, and so on and so forth. And then the last thing is they will just go inward and not connect with anyone. So not being thought aware, emotionally aware will lead them to unhealthy habits. The most important thing that I've been able to do, and my strapline is helping Muslim men to live a life they deserve, is that I believe that Muslim men aren't living the life they deserve because they don't know how to. And it's not just financial status or freedom. What about their emotional state? Really feeling that when they're at home, they're really connected to every member of the family. And it's not often about how much time, but the quality of connection they have. So it's those things that oftentimes men feel uncomfortable about, but actually it's those things that are necessary for men. So being emotionally connected to themselves, number one, being mentally aware of their thoughts, how they're thinking, where they focus their attention, physically, how they're looking after themselves through their diet and through their exercise, etc. And last but not least, and most Muslim men are actually strong in this area, but being spiritually strong. So those are the 4 areas. And I say there are 4 energy baskets, your physical state, your psychological or mental state, your emotional state, and your spiritual state. And balancing these 4 areas is really important because, your lowest area will be the weakest link. And no matter how hard you try in all the other areas, this will always be like an anchor. I say like it's like an anchor holding a ship down, right? And the chain allows, it's only a certain distance where the ship can go. It can't go any further because the anchor is holding it back. So your lowest area will always hold you back from reaching, a higher level. So therefore, I always force men to work on their lowest area because that's where you will get the most results, and it affects every other area as well. So some of the successes I've seen, I'm working with a couple of men now, is again, men who have experienced divorce, men who have experienced trauma in their childhood and haven't been able to express that to anyone, but yet it's playing out in their lives, is that through a very rigorous process, I've helped them to, number one, feel they can trust me. And part of that process has been that I've been very open and vulnerable with them. Men are very reticent. They don't want to talk because what's this coaching about? What's therapy? There's nothing wrong with me. So I role model this. So I say, look, it's okay. It's okay not to be okay. and let me share something with you. So I'm open. I don't trauma dump, but I just show them a little bit and say, here you go. So when they open up, they realize actually there's so much that they've kept within themselves that was just suppressed. And once they begin to open up, they realize actually it's very therapeutic for them. It's very emancipating for them to be able to share something. Some men have literally held secrets for their whole life, sister. And then, I've experienced witnessed men cry in front of me, and they've said, I've never told anyone this. I've had Muslim men who are practicing, and they've said they've contemplated suicide several times. They feel like no one understands them. And it's the first time they've been able to express themselves because they don't feel like I'm judging them. And I always say, I will not judge you for whatever you are going through or been through, because that's not my role. My role is to listen and to help us to redirect your thinking and think differently in a way that is actually helpful to you rather than it being something that brings you down. So some of the successes have been that people have been living like incidental lives, just things happen to them because of their parents, because of their culture, or, their family. So being a doctor or engineer or whatever, it's because of other people. And all of a sudden they realize, actually, these are my core values. And the reason I feel so low spiritually is because my values have been put on the back shelf, right? The reason I'm not happy in my marriage is because it wasn't my choice anyway. The reason I feel the way I feel is because I didn't even know myself. So that realization of who they've always been, but those layers have been put on top of their true identity, start to, come off slowly. And when they're unpeeling these layers, they realize actually there's a whole new world for me to experience. I had all these limitations put upon me by me. And that's the ironic thing, is we oftentimes allow ourselves to be trapped. Like Rumi talks about this, it's strange to see a prisoner behind bars with the keys to his own freedom. So we have the keys to our own freedom, but we become prisoners, because we just can't, we're unable to use the key. Sometimes we don't even know we have the key.
Mhm. And what I'm thinking is that this is such noble work, because you have these people that are living their lives as if they are corpses. They're like walking
Yes,
corpses.
yes,
As you say, they are so inauthentic. They are living for other reasons, or just
yeah,
like a shadow version of themselves. So
yes,
it's really important work, mashallah, and it has a ripple effect, because then the marriage flourishes, the children are happier, etc., etc.
yes,
Very
yes,
important.
absolutely.
I'd like to get to the juicy bit, which
Okay.
is when when you went through this process yourself, and
Mhm.
as you said, your frequency was much higher, and then how did you meet the love of your life and your wife, Victoria?
Okay, so she met me,
Okay.
just for the record, and she's okay with it. She always says this. So the way we describe this is that, if your energy is raised, it's like you're looking on this plane here. Now, someone else could be literally your soulmate, but they're on this plane here. And because they haven't done the work, their plane of visibility is here. This person has to do the work to come up to this level so you both can see each other. And that's why inner work, I know it's cliche, but inner work is so important. By inner work, I mean this sense of self-realization and purification rolled into one. I'm purifying myself from, anger and, seeing other people as less than me and all those things. And self-realization, actually, this is the type of person I am because I love connection. I'm the type of person I'm very diligent, my value, or I have integrity. I live and die by integrity. When you realize those things about you, you become a unique being. So the way we met was that, we'd both a year previous to that gone through a divorce, and it wasn't a great experience. And so we did some self-work and self-reflection and all those wonderful things. And so she was posting, I was posting great stuff. So it was like almost like, a mirror of each other. And we had one mutual friend in America. God bless him. I can't remember who it is. And it kind of, she says, I popped up as a suggested, contact. And she said it happened several times. So I thought, who is this guy? Okay. So she followed my profile, had a look. She said, she says it, I thought you were a really great guy. I wanted to look for your wife. She says, I couldn't find your wife. So she thought, like others, they hide their wives. So we have a laugh and a joke about this one. But she said, I couldn't find your wife. So, friend requested you. And then through Instagram, she just messaged me one day. She said, the post you put up has really had a profound impact on me. It was so positive. Thank you so much. So I wasn't looking for anyone. Same with her. And I think when you let go of that energy that you're looking for someone, you just exude something slightly of desperation. But when you let go, you let go. There's no desperation there. It's fine. It's okay. I'm all right where I am. And I think the moment you get to a point where you're happy with yourself, I think that's the point you're ready. So then she put up a post about her divorce on Facebook, and how difficult that was. And it just resonated so much. It was almost like a mirror experience that I had. Then I DM'd her and I said, I cannot fathom out what you've been through. More power to you. You've done an amazing job of recovery. And what happened was, I think over the next few weeks, we just infrequently, every 3, 4 days, would send a quick message about this and that. And it happened organically, very organically. And, one of the things I'd like to say to the listeners is that I was still stuck, because she asked me a question. She said, would you ever get married again? And I said, no. I said, no way. She said, why? I said, because I've been hurt too much and I don't think I can do this thing. So that was my not only mental block, I could literally feel it as I said it, as I don't think I can do it. She said something really profound, which gave me permission to see a different way. And she said, be guarded, yet open in case the right person comes along. And I said, can you say that again, please? She said, be guarded, meaning protect your heart, but yet open in case the right person comes along. I said, wow, that's amazing. It gives me permission to guard myself, because I need to be guarded right now. Yeah. Because we all want to protect ourselves from being hurt again. And that's one of the biggest barriers for people who've been through a divorce or been hurt by a relationship, that you don't want it to happen again, because those trauma reactions come up again. You have that feeling, real feeling of, this is not nice, and I don't want to feel this again. I talk to men sometimes, they say that, I don't want to get married again because in case I get divorced. I said, you're divorced already. What's the point of getting married? Because they jump ahead of thinking of divorce, and your brain will, make every excuse for you not to get married because you're already thinking of divorce. So she gave me permission to think differently. And so from that, mashallah, it blossomed. And I think, it came to a point where we began to consider each other. And the conversations then, changed slightly. Alhamdulillah, after 4 months, we were courting. So she was in America at the time, in the UK, 4,000 miles apart. So we were conversing, because I think, we'd been divorced before. Our conversations were different, more mature, civil. We were really finding out things on a deeper level. So not, do you pray? What does prayer give to you? The more deeper questions. You know, what's the best thing that you like about being a Muslim? Right. And if you had, like I asked her a question once, I asked her, I said, if you had all the money in the world, you know, what would you be doing tomorrow? So things around purpose and, you know, vision and stuff. So the conversations were a lot more deeper. So I'd say to people who are courting and, you know, and the like, is have some halal fun in the sense to discover a little bit more about yourself and be honest with what you want, but also discover more things about the person, this prospective person, and dig deeper because a real person is very deep, deep in there somewhere. But I think it's your role to discover who this person is.
Mhm. That's a really beautiful story. And what I love so much about your story is, first of all, how literally in a second, everything in a person's life can dramatically change. The other
Yes.
thing is that the person who you might be extremely compatible with might be living across the ocean in another country.
Yes.
And also that one can find true, meaningful love in his or her 50s,
Mhm.
and that you and I believe Victoria herself, neither of you were actually looking actively. You were not looking,
No, we weren't.
right?
No.
Neither of you. And just like that, as you say, it happens because there isn't that underlying desperation.
Yes.
And that when you increase your frequency, you attract in kind. So as you had said yourself, that if you had met her, for example, years before that,
No.
it wouldn't even have happened, right?
No, no. I was down here. Yeah, nowhere near. Nowhere near.
Right. And so that leads me to the question that when it comes to increasing one's frequency, apart from the obvious of eating right and exercising, do you have
Yes.
any other advice about how to get from here to here?
Yeah. I'd say it's really important to be honest with yourself. If we have a list of I want, I need, I want, I need, I want, I need from this other person, then be honest with yourself. Are you able to also be that person yourself? Would you want to be with yourself in the first place? And then if there's something that you don't like about yourself, change it. Work and change it. And so again, I go back to this, you know, the four quadrants. I do this with all the men I work with. I have a quiz, so they complete a quiz. It's called the Strong Believer Quiz, and so they have a set of 20 questions, random questions, and the results will give them an idea of where they are physically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. And with the results, I can see every question and how they've answered it and where their weak points are. When you have the data of where you need to improve, it's gold dust. So understanding where you need to put the work in is important, but it can't be just ad hoc. So it's going to be very diligently, you know, identified that this is where I need to do my work. And then as you bring those areas up, really it's about your whole state, your well-being will improve overall. Your confidence, self-confidence, self-image, your self-esteem, the way you see yourself, obviously, will be different, and you show up a better person. So it's a constant self-reflection, constant self-work to make sure that you raise your own energy in these quadrants. And I may share it with you actually, so you can have a bit of play with it. It's something that took me a long time to put together. Because I really developed in the back of what I went through and what were some of the things that were missing for me, even. Had I had this quiz right at the beginning, it'd been really easy work.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. It really gives you an insight like nothing else. And then keep working in a very practical way, you know, in a very informed way that you know exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that's the most important thing. And as you feel more confident, especially for men, the mental health will improve. So hence I have a mindfulness journal for men so they can really start to work on, how they perceive themselves, what kind of things they do, what that self-talk is, for them, and why they're saying those things, to themselves, and how they can overturn that as well. It's very important to be very self-reflective. And really, in a nutshell, this work never ends. It's never the case that, I've done the quiz, I've completed the journal, I know my results, and I've done some work, I'm great. No, it's a constant thing that you keep on working. It's almost like a sculpture, just chipping away all the time to create something beautiful.
Now, are you able to comment about on loneliness? The reason I ask that is because it's a very common negative emotion that both married and single people experience.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I'm quite sure that there are many married people out there who are within a marriage, they have a partner, but they still feel incredibly isolated and lonely and not
Yes.
seen and heard. And then you get the ones who are single, who are trying to find a spouse. And so they might think, okay, I know I need to get with the program and do A, B, and C to increase my frequency, but this is a kind of a like this wave that comes over. And if you are able to comment on that.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So we have personal loneliness. So there's a disconnection with oneself, and there's social loneliness where you're disconnected from people. And I know this because it's what I was going through myself. So there's this personal loneliness where I was disconnected from who I was. Social loneliness where you're disconnected from people around you. And this existential loneliness where you start to question the meaning of life and what is this all about, people, marriage, families, it's like on another level. For all cases, self-care. You have to institute self-care, and self-care looks different for different people. Self-care could be that I go beside the sea, right? Victoria loves the seaside, so she wants to go to the sea. It could be I go for a stroll, and observes Allah's creation, for example. Self-care might be that I read a book. Self-care could be that I just spend some time with myself. Self-care, it could be many, many different things. So the first part is to make sure that you do what you need to do to institute self-care, because when you're feeling like you're looking after yourself, there's an element of you where you will not feel lonely when you're by yourself. Because when there's no people around and it's quiet, because when you're with people, everything's noisy, right? There are no thoughts in terms of loneliness. If we take one angle, because the extreme is that you're with people, but you still feel lonely, right? But if it's the first one, you're with people, or you're keeping yourself busy, you can't be alone with yourself, you don't feel lonely. But when you're by yourself and you feel lonely, you need to look after yourself and do the things that make you feel special. Secondly, when it comes to social loneliness, make sure you don't break ties with friends and family who really care about you, deeply care about you. I remember one of the things that happened to me was that I just basically just excluded myself from my friends even. There was this feeling of sadness that overcame me, and I didn't want to connect with anyone. In fact, even my sisters, because whenever my sister would say something, I'd kind of just tear up. So I just withdrew. So have people, a circle around you that you can, draw upon and speak to and really connect with, and make sure that you keep doing those things. And loneliness in marriage is born out of lack of connection again. When two people are disconnected. And someone once said, why is it that two people could be sat next to each other, yet they're screaming, right? And the reason they're screaming is because their hearts are distant. And how can it be that two people are sat in the same room, but on the opposite sides of the room, and they don't say a word, yet they understand each other? It's because their hearts are connected. So the real thing is here is that when your hearts are connected as two human beings, two souls, two human beings who really care for each other, when they're connected, you can't feel lonely. You're not allowed in one sense. But you could be living in the same household and the hearts are disconnected and you feel lonely, even though there are people present. So really, the bottom line for me is that you need to have connection. And we know, as Maslow said in his hierarchy, food, shelter, and clothing is the basic. Then the next thing is love and connection. Connection is just a fundamental thing that we need as human beings.
Mm. In closing, what would you say to those who are thinking about getting remarried, marriage advice, and you might be able to attach to that the importance of core values and discovering that?
No, absolutely. I would say take the time to know yourself on a deeper level. And core values are very important to that process to discover what they are. And not only know them by name, because two people can have the same value but interpret them differently. So two people can have a value of freedom, but one says, I want to travel the world. The other one says, no, freedom to me is to have one place in one city, and that's it. That's freedom for me. So identify them, but also define them. Number two, also know, for singles especially, not only have a list of your non-negotiables, but really understand why this non-negotiable is important to you. My wife gives this really great example. She says that, one of her non-negotiables was to have a 6'2" guy. I'm not 6'2", by the way. And she subsequently, after we got married, she explored it, and even through the courting process, what was important about a 6'2" person. So the why. It was important because it represented safety. So it's really important to know why you have a non-negotiable, not just I have a non-negotiable. And if it's valid, if he has to be from a certain country and you have a good reason, absolutely fantastic. But if you just say it's this country or this size or whatever, and you don't know why, then I think you're missing the trick. So your non-negotiables, but understand why. And thirdly, I'd said probably the most important thing is, we have a tendency to always create like invisible walls around us, or barriers or limitations or boundaries, where we feel, okay, this is the threshold. I'd say the minute that you open yourself to anything is possible, it will be possible, right? The minute you believe that something amazing is going to happen, something amazing will happen, inshallah. Yes? And I think that's the biggest block we have. We keep telling ourselves, I don't know, I'm broken, I've been married before, or people can't get married, I'm 30, 35, 40. It's done for me. You are literally self-sabotaging. Okay? You're not helping yourself. You need to get out of your own way. Okay? Get out of your own way. Okay? Begin to analyze how you're thinking, what kind of things you're saying to yourself. Get out of your own way and let things happen. Just do the work. Have this belief that Allah will put somebody in your way, but you got to allow it to happen. Be ready for that person. Get to a point, a level where you want this type of person.
Yeah.
And anything's possible. Anything is possible, but you have to believe it's possible. If you don't believe it's possible, who can help you?
Absolutely, very insightful. Tafazal, I've heard you mention something. Was it on the core values, and you mentioned different categories? If you don't mind explaining that briefly. Were there Fs, different Fs?
Oh, the 5 Fs.
Okay. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh yeah, sure. That was actually something I use as a framework for some people who are literally recovering from a divorce or a breakup. And so it's faith, fun, family, fitness, and finances. It's like the 4 quadrants of energy, but it's the 5 Fs. People remember these a lot more quicker or a lot more easier. So it's making sure that these quadrants are all, these 5 Fs are also something you focus on, because sometimes people forget that, as well as faith is also fun. Yeah. As well as fitness, there's also family, right? And finances. When someone's had a bad experience, sometimes finances are affected as well. So making sure that, you keep focusing on these, and to pick yourself back up again, make sure that these areas are well looked after.
Okay, thank you so much. It was so wonderful
Well,
speaking with you. I really value your input, your insight, and I will definitely be sharing with our community your Facebook page, your website. And just to reiterate that Brother Tafazal, Coach Taf, he actually sees men privately, but he and his wife do couple coaching collectively, right?
yes, that's what we do, inshallah. And I share both of those websites as well.
Okay. Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity as well, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alhamdulillah.